Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We've got a very special guest today, some media royalty in the Northeast, I would say. We've got Simon O'Rourke from ITV. How are you doing, Simon? How's things at the moment?
I'm not feeling particularly regal, but apart from that, I feel great. Thank you, Connor. It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much.
And I wanted to talk, before we talked about Sunderland, which obviously that's going to be the main point of this, but I wanted to talk about sort of the state of Northeast football to begin with, because I feel like we're in a bit of a weird place right now, because obviously Sunderland and Newcastle doing pretty well. Middlesbrough seem to be doing pretty well, might get promoted potentially this season. I think they'll probably have to settle for the playoffs. Then we've got South Shields, who are sort of pushing, could potentially get promoted. But I feel like everyone else is a bit of a disaster right now. Is that fair to say? I don't know if I'm missing anyone, but I mean, my local team, Blythe Spartans, are having a stinker. I mean, they have plummeted down the leagues the last few years. Lost last night, 4-3 as well. But what's your sort of feel on the state of Northeast football right now?
It's a good question to start off, really. I think, in a way, it probably mirrors all of football in that it's gone like the top 5% have got all the resources and all the media coverage and everything, and the rest sort of hasn't got a great deal. There's not a lot of food on the plate, because if you remember the time, well, you'll probably like a babe in arms, but if you remember the time when Middlesbrough were actually in the Premier League as well as Newcastle and Sunderland, going back to 20 years now, then there was kind of a thriving lower league and non-league community as well. Hartlepool were in the Football League. Darlington, I think at that point, were probably still in the Football League as well. York City were. And now there's like nothing there, really. I mean, there's Harrogate, who I cover a little bit because they're right on the end of our transmission area. But you've got the teams in the National League who are kind of doing okay. As you said, I think quite right to mention South Shields. I'm actually thinking about them a bit myself this week. And they've had an amazing start to the season in National North. But a lot of the teams that we used to sort of think of as the thriving non-league teams are in National North now, or have gone through various things. So it's kind of weird. I mean, you can't deny that at the top end, it is strong. But underneath, it's kind of not, the foundations kind of maybe aren't what they were before.
Well, I was at Carlisle Hartlepool, I think it was last week they played. And obviously that's now a National League game, which is ridiculous that it's a National League game, but it is. But I was sat there and there was maybe 8,000 people at the game. Hartlepool had a full away end. And we're sat in the National League and I'm like, in a way, we're talking about the fact that clubs themselves are struggling and maybe aren't the levels they are. But I don't actually know if Carlisle classes as your patch. I don't know if you actually cover them or not. But Carlisle, Hartlepool, I look at them and I think, well, they actually are thriving in the sense that the interest is still there as it has been. It's just the fact the clubs are doing so poor on the field. But I was shocked when I went there and I was like, God, like there's a full away end. The ground feels busy. It did not feel like a National League game. And I was sort of got a little bit of heart from that people are still going and are still interested in these clubs, even though they're obviously at the sort of lowest points right now.
Yeah, perfectly fair point. I mean, I think with Carlisle, you need to factor in it's their first season in the non-league, or the first season in the non-league for a good few years. And so that's kind of a novelty as well. And they probably expect to win it as well at Carlisle. We cover Carlisle through Border Television, incidentally. The fan interest is still there. And that's a sort of double-edged sword, because I think it's brilliant. And that's what keeps these clubs alive, both financially, culturally, and emotionally. But you think like Hartlepool's a good example. That's a fan base that, my word, has been through the ringer over the past few years, and they still fill the away end midweek at Carlisle. That's brilliant, but at the same time, it's also slightly tragic that they haven't got a more fully functional working football club to support.
Yeah, no, that is right. But let's talk now about Sunderland. I want to touch on the Man United game a little bit, and look, and it's almost like starting with a little bit of a negative, but what did you make of the display overall? I mean, I think there was a lot of sort of, I want to say excitement, maybe sort of optimism potentially going into the game. And I watched a lot of, pundits were saying that they were a little bit worried about Man United, playing Sunderland. Sunderland's had a decent start of the season. And I feel like there was a lot of people thinking this would be the final nail in the Ruben Amorim coffin. And then the game started and Man United were pretty good. Like, it's fair to say, I think Sunderland obviously had their issues, but I thought Man United just played well and that can happen. But what did you make of the game overall?
Yeah. What you've said, I think, it is interesting. The build-up was interesting. I think the interesting thing about the build-up is that Sunderland have started the season so well that all the stuff about, oh my, something could happen here, this could be the final nail in Ruben Amorim's coffin, all that was valid, but the way the game played out was actually something different entirely, and something that, as good as Sunderland have been this season, and I'm basically going to spend the next however long we're on saying how good Sunderland have been this season, Saturday was the sort of game that they are going to have to get used to. It was a Premier League game where they got beat, and they probably deserved to get beat, and they got beat because the team they were playing had better players and actually played quite well on the day, and Sunderland weren't at maybe the 97, 98, 99% that they have been operating at through most of the season. They just kind of got beat. The performance was all right by the time they'd worked out what they needed to do to stem the flow. The game had gone, and there are going to be more games like that this season. And the positivity of the start is one of my few worries about the season. Is the positivity of the start is masking the fact that there are going to be bad days, and you have to learn as a fan base and as a club. You have to learn to lose as well as learn to win in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that we've kind of got, I don't want to say carried away, because I think you should get carried away. I mean, we saw that's been sort of a motto of the season, hasn't it? Let's just get carried away. Why not? But I feel like before the game, there was a lot of feeling of, do you know what? This has actually been not easy, but easier than I thought. And I have obviously watched a lot of Premier League football. I've seen the 6 promoted teams the last couple of years go straight back down. I think there's a lot of context around why those teams were relegated. And I don't think Sunderland, Leeds, or Burnley should look at that and think that's a reason why they should get relegated. But I think the start was so good that we went into this game with just going to Old Trafford with a weird sense of optimism. It was just odd. And then we were brought back down to earth within half an hour. And I apologize, you can hear my dog barking in the background, but it is what it is. He's a feature of this show.
Well, in fact, also my dog's in the kitchen as well, so my dog might bark. Yeah, I agree. I also agree it's fine for people to get carried away. You consider the last decade of Sunderland Football Club's history. If you can't enjoy this, then, you know, really, you're probably wasting your time. So it's fine to get a bit carried away, but I do think that there is an element of it actually being best described as being slightly carried away, because I've got a slightly different take on the start of the season. As I say, I think it's enormously positive, but I'm not sure it's been easy. West Ham became easy in the last 5-10 minutes, but apart from that, I wouldn't say that there's actually been an easy game on the slate so far. And there is sort of lurking in the background that knowledge that they still haven't really played anyone. Crystal Palace is the best team they've played. And, you know, Man United are a flaming bin fire of a football club who've got good players and happen to play well on Saturday. So there are bigger tests ahead, but go back to the point. It's all right to get a bit carried away. I just think you're going to have to learn to get used to the odd day like Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of the 3 at the back discussion that's happening throughout the fan base? Because at the weekend, obviously, we go 2-0 down and the manager goes, right, we need to go back to 3 at the back. And I think it's fair to say that Sunderland were far better when they did that. Now, there is also the fact that Man United were 2-0 up. Therefore, they have probably changed the way that they're playing and maybe aren't as, attacking. So therefore, we look a bit more settled with 3 at the back. But for me, it feels like this is a weapon or a tool that we have. We were so good against Aston Villa when we did this. We went to 3 at the back. And I think at away games in particular, we've got Chelsea obviously coming up away. We've also got Arsenal coming up at home. I feel like the 3 at the back is something we need to see in those games where we aren't going to necessarily command a lot of control in the football match.
I think it's definitely a club in the bag. And obviously, it gets Dan Bollard on the pitch as well, which I think most Sunderland fans would recognise is a good thing. I don't know if I want to see them play it all the time, because I think as well as they played against Aston Villa, as you rightly say, and as much as they stem the flow on Saturday, I feel that with Sunderland set up, the 3 at the back is more to sort of emphasise the defensive structure rather than the offensive structure of the game. And whilst there'll be games like away at Chelsea, for example, or at home to Arsenal, where you think that might be the way to go, I think it's more a club in the bag than something that they should be looking to do all the time. I think Regis Lebris is more comfortable with a 4 at the back system. I think mostly you'd say the playing staff is probably more suited to 4 at the back, although they have got the players to do 3 at the back as well. I think what I saw it as is one of the many things I like about Lebris is that he's an adaptable manager. He's not an idealist manager. He doesn't say this is the way we play and I won't change it under any circumstances. He saw what was going on at Manchester United. And the thing about Manchester United, the example of it as well, was he felt he had to match them up. He felt that it wasn't working what he'd started with, and he had to match up their formation to an extent. It worked insofar as what he wanted it to do, but it didn't get them back into the game. So I'm not sure it's something I want to see them do a great deal, but as I say, it's good to know. It's like a rescue club in your golf bag, isn't it? It's there. If you need to use it, it might be able to get you out of a bit of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it at home against Wolves. I think that the 4-3-3 has to be the way to go in them games, but I think away from home sometimes it might work. Let's talk about the refereeing decisions. Very intrigued. There's a lot of discussion around the penalty and the Bruno Fernandes potential red card. I'll give you my take that I think the penalty for me is not a penalty. If I'm a football fan, I don't want to see that given. But when it is given by the referee, a little part of me thought, well, is it a clear and obvious error? His foot is obviously very high. It is a reckless thing. So I was a little bit, when I've reflected on it, irritated that it was overturned. And that is a bit of a bias because I really don't think it is a penalty. It doesn't hit him in the head. So it's not a penalty. But just with the way the rules work with clear and obvious errors, I thought it might not get overturned. But then the red card where Traore runs through, I do not understand why that one isn't given. That, to me, that is just blatant. Fernandes trips him up. It's obviously not a yellow card. I mean, he got booked for diving. Fernandes trips him up. He's got a clear run in at goal. If that doesn't happen, an open net pretty much. I'm not really sure. I don't even know if that was even VAR checked. But yeah, I thought the penalty they probably just about got right. I've swayed on it, but I think they probably just did. The red card, I think that they got that one wrong.
Okay, well, let's not waste any more time on the penalty because I completely agree with everything you said about the penalty. I agree with everything you said about the red card as well. The red card one, or potential red card one, I found more interesting. I looked back at it last night. I'm not quite sure what was going on. So first of all, the referee has either A, got it wrong, or B, bottled it because it's Manchester United's captain and he might have to send him off. There is a C as well. I did notice looking back, if Traore burst between a player and a goalkeeper, you'd think, well, that's obviously a clear and obvious goal scoring opportunity, which it is. There was actually another defender covering. So it's not like he was walking it into an empty net. And so the referee might have made a judgment that, well, that might have been a foul, but I would only have given a yellow card for it because there was somebody back covering. I don't know about that. The bit that I don't understand and that does annoy me a bit was the VAR thing. Let's say VAR reached the right decision by hook or by crook on the penalty. Why didn't VAR intervene? Now, I know you could say it was outside the area, therefore wouldn't have been a penalty. And you could argue they might have thought it was a yellow card and not a red card. But that I thought VAR was allowed to intervene if they saw what they considered to be a red card and they thought the referee hasn't seen it. So maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'm just not reading it right. That just left a bad taste because at the end of it all, where you think, I'm pretty sure that's the wrong decision. And then to book Traore for diving, that just left a bad taste because that just clearly didn't seem right.
Yeah, the booking for diving for me was interesting because that suggests that the referee thinks there was a foul and he's trying to buy a foul, doesn't it? If you've booked him for diving, you're basically saying you've tried to buy a free kick there, but you weren't touched, and he was touched. And that's why, to me, it was just a strange decision. I don't think it would have. Sunderland didn't deserve anything from the game, so I mean, it's not really sour grapes. I don't think we can sit here and say that Sunderland should have drawn the game. I mean, they did miss a few chances in the match, but I don't think they deserved anything from it.
No, I agree. But I don't think had it been a red card, I don't think it would materially have altered the outcome.
No, I would agree as well. And look, it happens. We missed chances in the game, so sort of it is what it is. Let's talk a little bit about the start to the season. What do you make overall of the first 7 games? I know we sort of touched on this a little bit before, and the perceived easy start of the season is interest. I think that's a really good talking point, because I do watch other clubs, and I've seen a lot of Leeds fans say, "Oh, well, Sunderland haven't played many teams yet." I've seen Burnley fans say, well, Burnley's obviously played pretty much every top team in the league. But there's a different pressure when you have to play West Ham and Brentford at home. And you have to probably get something from playing Nottingham Forest or Man United away. You have to get something from these games. I think that is harder. I mean, we can look at the fixtures now and see that Burnley have got to play Leeds and Wolves in their next 2 games. So they'll look at that and say it's an easier game, but you have to win those games. That makes it, in my opinion, in a way harder, whereas Burnley to this point can just look at the fixtures and go, yeah, we've only got 4 points, but we've played really, really difficult games. There's been less pressure on their start of the season, but I think it's quite interesting. But what have you made of that whole discussion?
I think it's worked in Sunderland's favour, as anyone in football will tell you. What looks like a soft start on the schedule only works to your advantage if you win the games, and Sunderland have won 3 of the games. I think every Sunderland fan would be probably beyond delighted with the points all they've got to this stage in the season. I also think ultimately it might be to Sunderland's advantage the way the fixtures worked out, because they're getting eased into the Premier League. They had to hit the ground running. That was important. If any promoted team's going to have any chance of staying up in this day and age, you've got to do a number of things, including recruit properly and expensively. You've got to hit the ground running. You've got to be ready to go from day one. And Sunderland were ready to go from day one. And don't underestimate the emotional power of that opening day victory. But I hope it will ultimately be to Sunderland's advantage that the fixtures is kind of eased them into the season in many ways. As I said, the big beast is still to come. And by the time Sunderland get to play the big beast over the next couple of months, they've sort of found their feet a little bit. They understand a little bit more about what the Premier League's like. And basically, it's just little things like, you play Millwall last season and probably 2 of their players are rubbish. And you think, well, there's little things that we can poke at during the game. Basically, there's no one rubbish in the Premier League. And as Labrise has said on a number of occasions, there's going to be games where a player who's better than any player Sunderland have got will just decide, well, I'm going to win the game today. And there's nothing Sunderland can do about that. So I think it's worked well. I think they have taken advantage. Could they have had more points? Yes, you can say that they could have, but I think overall they've done extremely well. I like the pragmatic nature of how they've got the points. I like how they're playing. Some of the signings obviously look fantastic. Really, really encouraged with where they're standing. But with this qualified thing of, I don't think anybody should think that they've cracked it yet.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing you see that teams who've got 11 points after 10 games pretty much always stay up. And I've seen that stat band round. Sunderland have done it after, 6 games they did it. They had 11 points, which was really impressive. But I think that can also lure us into a false sense of security, because on the one hand, I'm looking at it and going, well, if we maintain 1 point per game to the end of the season, we'll finish with like 40 plus points. And that sounds good. If we maintain what Leicester did last season, I think they finished with 26-ish points. From now at the end of the season, we'd finish in the mid-30s, which might be about enough to stay up. So there's a part of me that looks at the 11 points that we've got and think, what a foundation that is now from now to the end of the season. We've got 31 games to basically pick up 29 points to hit that magical 40 points total. But it's not necessarily as simple as that. Do you think this team has it in them to get 11 wins and 7 draws from now at the end of the season? Have you seen enough to suggest that we can maybe pick up another 6 home wins and a couple of away wins from now at the end of the season?
Definitely, no doubt in saying that at all. They've definitely got that. What I bristle's not the right word. What I worry about a little bit is the people basically having them staying up in the first week in October and saying, "Oh, it's done, sorted, it's all there." There's no worries at all. I'm not there yet, but they have made a great start. I don't think they'll need 40 points, but I do think it might need more than the 26 or 27 it's been the last couple of years. I think it's going to be in the mid-30s to be safe this year. Definitely, I can see Sunderland getting it, but it's not perfect. They haven't taken the league by storm. They've had to work hard. They've had to fight tooth and nail basically for every result they've got so far, and I think that will be the case throughout the entire season. So I still think that there'll be peaks and troughs ahead. But to go back to the answer to your original question, 100% I can see them getting the wins and the points that they need to stay up.
I mean, you've seen a lot of newly promoted Sunderland teams. I don't actually know how many newly promoted Sunderland teams you've seen. I don't know if you can work that out now. Probably 5 or 6.
Do you know what? It probably is. I mean, yeah. I've seen the good ones, the Peter Reid and to an extent the Roy Keane one, but and I've seen the, God bless him, the Mick McCarthy one, where you knew 25 minutes into the first game against Charlton, and yeah.
Well, what I was going to ask is if you look back at these Sunderland teams that have either A, stayed up or B, went down, are you seeing a lot of the traits in this team that we saw maybe in, I mean, that Peter Reid team in 1999 is probably a little bit different because they, nearly finished in Europe, but that Roy Keane team, they were quite gritty. They found a way to score goals late on, which this team seems to have done as well. But are you seeing comparisons maybe to those teams and how they stayed up and then how this team could potentially stay up?
Yeah, interesting point. I think I'd love to say I saw like Reedy's team in this. I think the better comparison is probably the Roy Keane team that came up, which was nuggety, and as you say, had this habit of scoring last-minute goals, and that season was never entirely comfortable, but they got there in the end, and that's kind of the vibe I'm getting from this Sunderland team. Not necessarily similar in terms of the personnel playing for them, but that feeling that they might just have enough here. They might be good. If I could, one characteristic that team had, certainly the Peter Reid team had, that had many other things as well, but one characteristic that Roy Keane team had, which I have seen from this team so far, is that they are not afraid. They are not afraid of the Premier League. And I know we live in like the era of XG and stat-based football, but sometimes it can come down to a gut thing. And I just haven't seen Sunderland look afraid of this so far this season. They've almost taken it on since the playoff final. They haven't been afraid in the way that they've recruited. They haven't been afraid in the tough decisions that they've taken in who's actually playing and who's not playing. And they haven't been afraid on the pitch when they're playing Premier League opponents.
It's interesting you mentioned the playoff final, because I was talking to some fans yesterday, and people who are, so I'm 31, so I'm probably a little bit too young really to remember the Peter Reid. I mean, I went to the Peter Reid days, but I'm too young to properly acknowledge it. So this is probably about as good as it's been to be a Sunderland fan. This, if you are under the age of 30, like the promotion, the way that happened in the playoffs, the final was incredible. Obviously, a brilliant day, and then we've started the season, and there's been a buzz around the club. The stadium's full every game, and in my supporting life, that hasn't really happened. How important do you think that is as a fan base? That, I mean, on the Netflix documentary is that famous clip where I don't know who it is, but she says, "Why is it never us?" And that's like something that's played all the time. And it feels like for the first time in a long time, it is us right now. Like, it feels like actually the football gods, if they exist, are looking down on Sunderland and saying, have a little bit of a good time and enjoy this. But how important do you think that is as a fan base, where this football club, I mean, you've been covering it basically for the last 10 years. It's probably been the biggest joke in football for being a club of this size. It's certainly up there. It has to be, possibly even in the world. Like, that's how bad it was. And it was filmed on Netflix for the whole world to see. The fact that we've came from that to this point now, do you think that's maybe a little bit understated and people aren't necessarily zooming out and thinking, oh, wow, like this has been a really, really impressive 6 months from this club?
Of course it has. Like, the club's got its dignity back, hasn't it? It's had it back for a long time, but yeah, they're not a laughing stock anymore. They want to be a serious football club again, and people can't point and laugh anymore. And yeah, it's a huge thing for young fans who, all they've ever known might be the bad times. Then suddenly says, wow, these are the good times, and they feel really good. For older generation fans, it feels really good because you've lived through a lot of really bad stuff. Excuse me, there's a fly in the room. And of course, it's great. It's fantastic. And just about that whole match day thing, it does look and feel good. That it feels like a Premier League match day experience when you go to the Stadium of Light for a league game now. I really love what they've done inside the ground. I think outside the ground, especially when that footbridge opens, leading from Keele Square over past the sheepfolds and down towards the stadium, I think it's going to look spectacular. I think it's going to be absolutely brilliant. And I think that also plays into this idea that Sunderland as a football club might, if they play this right, have a good window of opportunity here to do something, to create their own little era of success, whatever success looks like for Sunderland Football Club.
Yeah, I would agree. And what do you make of? So I think that a lot of what's happened on the pitch has been the result of things being right off the pitch. And what I mean by that is the bespoke kits, I feel like, give a sense of pride. I feel like them tidying up the stadium over the last year has maybe just raised the standards at the football club. And certainly, when I used to work at the football club, there were no standards, I would say, in terms of how it was run. There was, issues where, lights wouldn't turn on, where things hadn't been decorated. The sign outside the Academy Light was pink that said "Welcome to Sunderland AFC" and things like that. There was no pride taken into the club, which I think affects what happens on the pitch. And those are the subtle things that when people were asking why, when we were falling down the leagues, why is this group of players who've got Premier League level, why are they getting relegated? And I think that comes from the standards that a player sees when they come in. When you go to the Academy Light, does it feel like a professional environment? And if it doesn't, then how do you expect the players to perform in a professional way? And you see that throughout the whole club. If the stadium isn't right, how do the players feel about playing there when you've got a rundown football ground with pink seats? But to be fair, they're looking a bit pink now, but pink seats. How does that make the players feel? And I think it's maybe understated how important it was to drag the standards of the club off the pitch up to make sure that on pitch did well. And I feel like the two are linked, and most people don't necessarily see it in that way.
I agree. I think it's a big part of the battle. I think it's an interesting thing for Sunderland fans to get used to, because again, young fans may never have known it. Older fans may almost never have known this part of it either. Sunderland Football Club seems to have a clue now. Sunderland Football Club seems to know what it's doing. Most of all, Sunderland Football Club has a plan, an identifiable plan. And just the idea of Sunderland Football Club having a plan is kind of alien to anyone who's sort of followed them over the last certainly 10, 15 years. I mean, you went from rich man, no plan, to Trotters Independent Traders, to this young guy from Europe coming in who, well, what's going to happen here? But it turns out this young guy from Europe has got some interesting ideas and has surrounded himself gradually with people who he thinks can do a good job of pushing a football club in the right direction and running it well. And that's where they are now. And in comparison to some of the times where, as you say, the lights wouldn't go on, and there was just that sense of anything goes and people could come and steal a living at Sunderland. And it was just like a soft touch, and what other teams used to think of Sunderland, even when they were knocking about the bottom of the Premier League. It's a different place now. That they've got an idea. I think it all feeds in. I think the redecoration of the stadium. I think, like you say, the Hummel kits, which have been a huge success. I'm not saying everything's perfect, because I'm sure 1,000 people can put on your message board there and say the ticketing's not right or something's not right. Football clubs can't get all the tiny little details right, but a lot of the broad strokes, I think this current regime have recognised needed to be given attention, and by and large, they've made good steps towards making the whole idea of Sunderland Football Club just a better thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about recruitment. Do you think Sunderland are going to potentially, I want to talk about the players we potentially could be bringing in. Do you think in January we'll spend money? Do you think that they'll, if, for example, they look at it and go, we are a little bit short, maybe on the wing. I mean, I think we're short potentially on the right side. I still don't understand why they got rid of Patrick Roberts on loan. That's a different question for a different day. But do you think maybe there is money there to go, do you know what, we need to upgrade something so we can spend 20, 25, 30 million pounds if needs be? Or do you think this is kind of the squad as it is now from now at the end of the season?
I haven't done the sums, but I wouldn't expect that to be a great deal. I wouldn't expect that to be another week where they go out and buy a £20 million player virtually every day, as there was at one stage over the summer. I just think common sense. They spent a hell of a lot of money in the summer. They spent more money than I expected, than you expected, than probably anybody who supports the club expected, or probably anybody who's involved in the Premier League expected. therefore, it kind of stands to reason that there can't be an awful lot left in the coffers. I know I've kind of tried to understand a bit more about football finance over the last couple of years, even though old teachers of mine will tell you I'm not great with numbers. But I sort of understand why they had a bit of a unique PSR opportunity this summer. But I think they've kind of gone all in, to use that sort of poker term. And I think they've probably spent most of the money and always look beyond the headline figure of what they've actually spent on transfer fees or committed on transfer fees. It's the wages as well behind that. And I'm not sure I could see there being a great deal incoming in January unless there were outgoings, which might just sort of top up the pile of money. You know, that there's that Chelsea model of all you've got to do is keep trading and then ultimately you can keep buying as well. But I don't know. I'm not really expecting a huge amount on the incoming.
What about players to leave? You know, I look at Dan Neil, and I love Dan Neil, but it just feels like he's not really. He might get his opportunity, and obviously, if you know, touch wood, it doesn't happen. And I am touching wood. If Granit Xhaka got injured, then logically, I think Dan Neil would be the guy to slot in there. Dennis Serkin, you know, as a player that he's been injured. We've obviously brought in 2 left backs. I'm not massively sold on Masuaku as a left back, but I suppose again that's a different question for a different day. But I think if Dennis Serkin was fit right now, he would be playing. I think he would be playing in at left back. You know, players like Hjelde, I mean, other ones, I don't know. Is Abdullah Bar still knocking around? Jay Matete? But we've got still some fringe players who could leave. But do you think Dan Neil, Dennis Serkin, do you think they are likely to go, especially since they haven't signed new deals? Or do you think the club will just keep them at the end of the season and then wave them off on a free transfer?
I think the new deal thing is probably where the answer to that lies. I think, look, certainly with Dan, I think there might be a slightly different situation with Dennis Serkin. I don't know. It's just, but my instinct would say that with Dan, if Dan would be interested in signing a new contract to Sunderland, or you know, I'm sure he is interested. If they could find the right contract that suited all parties, I think Sunderland would like to keep him, and I think he'd like to stay. And I personally think that the Sunderland squad would be better this season if Dan Neil was part of it, appreciating that he's maybe not going to get on the pitch that much. But I don't know, you need a squad. Dan Neil's good, Dennis Serkin's good. I don't want to give these players away. Look, there's a certain class of player in the squad or at the fringes of the squad at Sunderland. You've mentioned some of the names. It's probably in those players' best interests to move on, but that's not going to shift the needle financially for Sunderland really anyway. But it's just a bit of a waste of their time being part of the squad now because they're not going to play. Dan Neil's is always an interesting one and will always be an emotive one. For me, I would keep him about if he can learn from Granit Xhaka for a year, 2 years, and if he's prepared to do that, that's the other thing. I'd like to keep him about, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, even if Siddiqui was to pick up an injury, then we've got Diarra out, Siddiqui out. There's a chance for him to get minutes in there. And overall, the summer recruitment, and I know I've heard you talk about this before on other platforms, but were you shocked? I mean, how many players do you think we were going to buy? Certainly when I was driving home from Wembley, we were sat in the car and we were doing some, football manager playing, talking about who you'd bring in, what sort of players. And I was expecting maybe 6 players to come in, probably at a cost of around 80 million. I didn't think they would go another 100 million on top of that. But are you surprised that it ended up being what it was and they did stuff so early, but also brought in so many players?
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised at all of it. More and more impressed the more the games they play, the more of these players that we see. If you think about the last couple of years with the sort of the teams that have come up and gone straight back down and really not made much of a fight of it, they actually all ended up spending quite a bit of money, but they usually spent it in a similar way where they'd do 2 or 3 early deals and then they'd sit and think about things for a while, probably play a couple of pre-season friendlies and think, I don't know if we've got enough here. And then they'd probably end up breaking the transfer record on somebody they didn't really want or didn't really need. And they just thought, we need to do something. We need to bring someone in to sort of make us believe, to make the fans believe. And I don't really think Sunderland have done that. Sunderland knew what they wanted. Well, basically, the first thing that they had to do was at some point, there must have been a meeting between all the sort of stakeholders in the coaching staff and the recruitment staff, where some hard and difficult words must have been spoken and saying, we've just had a brilliant season with these brilliant players. and now we need to basically replace most of them. So once they've done that, they just knew who they wanted and they acted really, really quickly. And that's the most impressive thing about it. Pre-season results, never, ever pay attention to them because Sunderland's weren't very good, but they got pre-season time together and that was the most important thing. And I'm just super impressed with the way that they've gone out and they've got players who they believed were going to be ready to go in the Premier League.
Looking ahead then, Wolves at home next, and that feels like such a big game. Then we've got Chelsea away, Everton at home, Arsenal at home. So we've just had 3 out of 4 away from home in this little chunk of 4 games. Now it's flipped the other way, and we're going to be at home a lot, and we're going to have some hopefully some good days at the Stadium Light. But what do you think should be the aim from these games? Because I like the idea of trying to maintain a point per game. I look at Wolves at home and think, well, that is a must win. I hate to use the term must win game. Maybe it's a must not lose game, but it feels like an opportunity is probably the best way to look at it. Wolves at home is a game that we all circled at the start of the season and said that needs to be 3 points. Chelsea away, hard. Everton at home. Again, I look at that and I think, well, maybe it's not one you look at it and say 3 points, but you go, can we get something from that game? So I'm looking at these forward thinking 4 points. That is the game. But what's your sort of view on that? And do you think the Wolves game is possibly a very high pressure game from our end? Because, I mean, it would also kick a relegation rival right in the nuts and put us, 12 points ahead of them? You know, that's a massive amount to be ahead of a team, and it would be very difficult for Wolves to overturn that. So, yeah, what's your sort of thought on this run of games?
I agree. Huge game, the Wolves game. It almost seems unfair on Sunderland when they've made such a good start that you can look at just one single game and think, my God, that's a huge game. But I agree, the Wolves game does feel like that. There's 2 sides to it, though, because if it's a big pressure game for Sunderland, what's it like for Wolves? Wolves haven't won a game yet in the Premier League, and they'll be looking at it and think, these are the games we've got to go and win now. They'll be thinking they've got to come to Sunderland and win the game, which might reflect their approach, which might actually help play into Sunderland's hands. Yeah, I mean, look, let's just be honest. Let's be brutally honest about it. That group of 4 games you said, you're looking to win the Wolves game. You're looking to win the Everton game, truth be told, and certainly not lose it. Anything else you get is a bonus. And we are starting now to cross into that mega club territory where Sunderland get to play the more functional mega clubs, more functional than Man United. I mean, the first away one, Chelsea, you never quite know what you're getting or who you're getting from Chelsea, but Cole Palmer will probably be fit again. That's hard. And then, I mean, Lord, if they're still unbeaten at the Stadium Light after the Arsenal game, then, you know, it's party time, isn't it? But that will be another experience, a kind of elite team coming and playing at the Stadium of Light, this is what you want. This is one of the things you get from being promoted. You get the privilege of having these teams coming and playing you, but those are really hard games. I mean, be under no illusion. So the Wolves game's the one to win. The Everton game is the supplementary one to win, or at least get something from. Anything else is a massive bonus.
Yeah, Wolves is. I mean, we're 10 days away from it as a city right now, and I'm nervous for that game. I'm feeling that sort of playoff semi-final level, and it's ridiculous. It's just a Premier League game. Fundamentally, it might not dictate where Sunderland finish at the end of the season. But Wolves have got a lot of big strikers. That's probably the thing that I look at with them. Jorgen Strand Larsen's a big boy. They brought in another striker whose name I can't say, so I won't say it. But I think it's like 6'7" or something stupid. That feels like Dan Ballard's built for these sorts of games. And we then get back to, we talked about the 3 at the back. I don't think you should be playing 3 at the back for this one, but how do we get Dan Ballard in the team, Mukwele in the team, Alderete still in the team? You know, you've got an issue at left back where I think Masuaku's really struggled. So do you put Trey Hume at left back, move Mukwele to right back, play Ballard and Alderete in the middle there? I feel like there's a definite decision that has to be made there, because if Wolves line up with Jorgen Strand Larsen, to me, sticking Dan Ballard on him just makes all the sense in the world. He did so well against Sesko at the weekend and kept him quiet when he came on. So that's a difficult decision, isn't it, for the manager, how to get this back 4 with all the best players in there?
Yeah, but there's a danger you're slipping into Sven-Göran Eriksson as England manager territory here and saying we need to get all of our best players on the pitch, regardless of whether they actually work as a team. So with the Wolves game, I would tell him to pick the team that he thinks he wants to that he wants to pick, and let Wolves worry about it. and he's shown that he's not afraid to make tactical shifts within a game. I am not. I love Dan Ballard. Don't get me wrong. It's just unfortunate how it's worked out for him. But Alderete and Mukiele have done fantastically as a pair at centre back. I don't think you're going to drop either of them. And at that point, rather than making one alteration, do you want to end up making three by moving, say, Mukiele out of position to right back and then, or pushing Hume to left back just so you can get Ballard in? Isn't it better to just make fewer alterations and go with what's working?
Well, I mean, that's why we're not paid the big bucks. That's the decision for the manager to make. But I just think that also what I like with Ballard, it's the attacking side of things. When we have set pieces, I mean, he should have scored at the weekend. Nobody's talked about that missed header he had at Man United just on half time. He should have scored in that game. But I feel like he is such a threat from those set pieces. And teams panic. I mean, when we played Burnley away, before he got injured, that set piece, Burnley had no idea how to deal with Dan Ballard in the air, and he won that header for Mayenda, and Mayenda then missed. I think it's such a big threat having him on the field from set pieces, and Sunderland have been fantastic from set pieces as well.
How would you do it then? How would you get him in the team? Would you move one of the two centre-backs to accommodate Ballard, or would you play three at the back? And if you're playing three at the back, who are you playing left wing back?
Well, what I would do if I was the manager, I'm moving Trey Hume over to left back. I'm playing Ballard and Alderete in there at centre back. And Mukiele, to be fair, has played a lot of his career at right back. So, I mean, he'd be comfortable at right back. I do know what you're saying. You're doing a lot of shifting. And this is very, feels in a little bit of a way like Martin O'Neill playing Jack Cole back at left back and Craig Gardner at right back, because that's the way the team ended up. You don't want to do that. You don't want to put Trey Hume on his wrong side. We saw him make that horrendous error against Nottingham Forest when he was on his wrong side, where he cut into his own box and lost the ball. And I get that. But I just think for games like this, where Wolves have such a clear striker target man threat, Dan Ballard is our best player to deal with that. So maybe you're very, very harsh and you just take Mukiele out and just go, you're not going to play this game. We'll just stick with that back four. But then I think we've also got an issue with Masuaku at left back, because I have not seen enough from him to suggest that he is a competent Premier League fullback or a good level Premier League fullback. He maybe is competent, but I don't think he's anything more than that. I'm worried about him. I thought at the weekend he really struggled when the wingers were running at him. Couldn't deal with Ahmad, couldn't deal with Mbeumo. And I think he needs to come out of the team. And I think we need to find a way, with Ronaldo out, obviously suspended, and Serkin not there, we need to find a way to cover that left side. So therefore, for me, you're answering that problem by putting Hume there. He has played there. And then you can then get Ballard in the team. That was my thought process.
It's interesting. I don't disagree. I think it's a bit early to be like writing players off, but I think Masuaku's had two tough games in the games he started, because I think he found it quite tough at Forest as well. So he might do well to be in the starting lineup against Wolves, but I think, as you said earlier, this is why we aren't football managers, isn't it, or head coaches, because these are difficult decisions.
Yes, very, very difficult decisions. And yeah, I think Masuaku, to be fair to him, he hasn't played a lot of football. He's come in on a free. He hasn't really had a massive preseason. So, I'm not saying that he won't necessarily make it, but I think there's games that suit him and there's games that aren't. And maybe this is a game that suits him because Wolves aren't as good as Man United, and therefore he won't be attacked as hard as he was against Manchester United, but who knows?
One thing I'd mention about Wolves as well is I almost guarantee whatever the results, and hopefully it goes like, for example, the West Ham game on the opening day, there'll be times in the Wolves game, as there were in the first half against West Ham, when Sunderland fans in the stands think, blimey, these are good.
Yeah.
Because it's the Premier League.
That's happened a lot.
Wolves will come up and they'll knock 7 or 8 passes around, and you'll think, blimey, look at that. And so nothing's going to be easy.
No, I mean, I remember Brentford, and we went 1-0 down. We conceded a penalty as well in that one. And when we went 1-0 down, I was like, oh, we are up that creek without a paddle here. And they found a way to win the game. And even against Forest, I mean, Forest on a different day do score in that game. But that's the Premier League, isn't it? You find a way. Let's talk about the Premier League generally before I let you go. I think it's really, really interesting to look at the relegation scrap, because if we are confident that Sunderland could survive, I'm pretty confident that Leeds could survive. I like what I've seen from them this season. That means that I've got to find 2 other teams to go down along with Burnley. I'm pretty sure Burnley are doomed. And then West Ham hire Nuno, and I think, well, I can't see Nuno taking a team down. And then I look at Nottingham Forest and all the players they've got, and I go, well, they've got a lot of good players. I don't see Nottingham Forest, even with Ange and everything that entails, going down. And I look at Brentford and think, well, I had them, but they've done all right this season. They've looked good at home. They've not been as bad as I thought they would be. So then I'm struggling to find who I think actually will be the bottom 3, which then leads me into a spiral of panic that, do you know what, maybe something won't be okay, and then I worry and I don't sleep. So what's your assessment on the bottom end of the league, and who do you think are the teams that are going to be in and around it? I'm not saying pick your bottom 3, but who are you looking at and being a little bit, maybe is worried the right word? I don't know, but worried about?
Well, this is why I think Sunderland fans shouldn't feel secure in the start. But I think it's an interesting starting point for the exercise. If you don't mind, if I'm looking down, I've just brought the table up. Let's work on your assumption that Sunderland and Leeds are going to stay up.
Yeah.
I don't think that Burnley will have quite enough to stay up, but I think that they will make a better fist of it than any of the 6 promoted clubs over the last 2 years.
Yeah. I think they'll get about 30 points. That's my guess.
Therefore, other teams have to go down under our proposed regime where Sunderland and Leeds are staying up. The most likely to go down, I think, are the bottom 2, which is Wolves and West Ham. Wolves had the sort of odd 3-month spell at the end of last season where they looked like an upper mid-table side where Vitor Pereira got them winning loads of games. I always say I'm a big fan of NBA basketball, and one of the lessons people tell you in that is never judge anybody who looks like a world beater in the last 2 months of the season, because a lot of teams have checked out at that point. So I didn't entirely trust Wolves' good run at the end of last season, and I'm not sure that they're going to have enough to stay up. And if just doing the maths on Wolves now with 2 points from 7 games, they've got an awful lot to do to stay up. West Ham, it's just a disaster of a football club. It's an absolute disaster of a football club, and they might be destined for relegation. The home fans kind of hate their own club. They loathe the stadium. They don't like how their image of themselves or what they think they should be as West Ham has become eroded and kind of gentrified. Yes, they've got Nuno, who did a very good job at Nottingham Forest, but he didn't do a very good job at Spurs. And he's only there because everything's gone so massively wrong for 2 different football clubs. So I really think West Ham could be in trouble as well. I also don't think they've got a particularly good squad. I saw Forest play at Newcastle on Sunday. Ooh. They've got the Europa League to contend with. They've got a manager who may have been one of the most bad tactical appointments in recent memory. They've got 2 exceptionally good midfielders in Gibbs, White, and Anderson. And apart from that, I wasn't particularly impressed with anything. They could struggle now, unless, I don't think any manager should be sacked after 4 or 5 games in 3-4 weeks. But they could be in trouble. You just look above. I think Brentford are in for a hard season because they lost so many of their assets on the playing side and in the dugout. And then, what about Fulham? But Fulham are just kind of there. And look, Fulham will probably just finish 14th because that's what Fulham do. And they're nice and they'll have 3 good wins and 7 other gritty wins and they'll be fine. But what if they don't? What if there is a faller from the sort of usual middle class who actually just suddenly has a bit of a bad year, maybe gets a couple of injuries and suddenly struggles a bit? Basically, I think that group of clubs, the sort of lower middle class of the Premier League, the Wolves, the West Hams, the Brentfords, well, the Brentfords this season, not so much last season, maybe the Fulham, maybe the Nottingham Forest, they are not sleeping at night because Sunderland have started the season really, really well. Leeds have started it pretty well, and Burnley don't look like mugs. Therefore, basically, they can't think, oh, look, it doesn't really matter what we do this season. 17th is the lowest we're going to finish. I don't think any of them can feel like that.
No, I think it is really interesting. I mean, I sort of did my updated 1 to 20 yesterday, and I had Forest in the bottom three. Because you can only judge them.
They were
They're bad.
really odd on Sunday.
That game went exactly how I knew it would go. When I watched it, I was like, Newcastle will just fight. Newcastle do not have to play particularly well. They just have to be functional to win this game of football. And that is literally all Newcastle did. They probably could have won it by more. I mean, if they won 5-0, I don't think Nottingham Forest could have really had too many complaints. I thought they were far better in the second half. But I just look at Forest and I think they've got a basket case owner, although he might sue us for saying that if he ever listens to this. But they've got an ownership that is weird. They've got a change of system. They've got Nuno, which is pragmatic, defensive, counter-attack. You switch to Ange Postecoglou. And what's interesting with that is, look at their squad. We all can say Milenkovic is a fantastic centre-back, but he's a fantastic centre-back defending his own box. He's not if you're pushing him all the way onto the halfway line, as they did against Sunderland, where they're trying to press the opposition. If you watch them against FC Midtjylland in the Europa League as well, they kept getting done because they were so high up the field. So all the qualities of this team, the pay, I mean, when they won at Newcastle, I think last season, didn't they? And they had Hudson-Odoi and Alanga with counter-attacks and it's quick. Well, if you're camped in the opposition half, you nullify a lot of the threats of this team. And I don't think Ange Postecoglou is, I don't want to say bright enough, that sounds harsh, but I think he's so stuck in how he wants to play. I don't see how he can get that team to perform as it did under Nuno Espirito Santo, which means therefore they are probably in big trouble if they stick with that experiment. It reminds me of like Russell Martin at Rangers. Do you know when people just don't fit? That's what this feels like to me. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think Ange is not quite as extreme as Russell Martin, but Ange is an idealist as well and wants to play Ange ball. And I don't want to dwell too long on a Newcastle United match when I'm talking to you here, but it did strike me that he absolutely insisted that his team played out from goal kicks at the back. And it really wasn't working because Newcastle are very, very good. Newcastle will commit 6-7 men to the press and they'll say, come on, then play out. And all it ended with was some centre-half stood near the corner flag, humping up to halfway. And they kept doing it. And you just don't, it's not working. Do something else. Yeah. If it was Régis Lebris, he'd do it twice. He'd go, nah, we're not doing that again. We'll have to think of something else. And he'd think of something else. Look, bottom line on the whole Premier League table thing is, I think we all hoped it going into the season, and I think the reality is bearing it out. Basically, there's a window of opportunity for Sunderland and indeed the other promoted clubs because there might be vulnerable teams this year.
Yeah, I want to finish off and ask if you think the Premier League is weaker or stronger than last season. And I think the answer to that question is both. I think the teams that have come up are stronger, and I think the teams that have been in that comfortable area of, we're not going to get relegated, they have all maybe been a little bit complacent and look a little bit weaker is probably what I would say. But I don't know. What do you think? Almost
exactly what you've said there. Basically, yeah. I think you're exactly spot on with that. Now, you know what? Exactly that. I've got nothing more to add.
Perfect. Well, what a way to end. I'm a genius. There we go. Thanks, Simon, though, for joining me today. It's been lovely to chat all things Sunderland. If you like this content, please like the video. Please subscribe as well and leave a comment. Let me know what you think of everything me and Simon said. Tell us we're idiots if we are idiots. Though Simon's probably not an idiot. You've been around the block a few times. I think you know your stuff. Probably a bit more than me.
Well, it's very nice of you to say so. I've certainly been around the block. Whether I know anything or not, I'll leave that to other people to decide.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks everyone for watching though, and we'll see you soon for another video.